We're live. Ladies and gentlemen, hello everybody. This is our roundtable. Today we're going to be discussing diet. We have a couple of very great participants, fascinating people on board. We have Dr. Shawn Baker. We have our home-based Nick Fott. We have Dr. Alan Goldhamer. The mission of the roundtable is to spread the roundtable spirit and technique of creating a common pool of meaning and conversation, especially when we're discussing divisive topics, things that are sensitive. And today, we're going to talk about diet. Sometimes it gets a little bit divisive, a little bit heated. Vegans will accuse meat eaters of being God's bane on earth, and meat eaters will accuse vegans of being awful people as well, whatever the case may be. We're going to try and avoid all that. We're going to create a conversation where everybody's opinion is heard and shared. In order to facilitate that kind of conversation in the roundtable, we have a couple of ground rules. The first one is that all the participants of the roundtable are equal in importance. We have a couple of MDs and ODs here, all kinds of doctors. We have Nick Fott. It doesn't matter what your background is. Once you're in the roundtable, your opinion is as valid. We're going to be listening to everybody. The roundtable will be organized by a moderator who will present questions and remind people about the roundtable rules. That's my task. One person will be speaking at a time. The order of speech will be in a predetermined order. And here are some of the hardest and most important rules that I hope will spread out from this roundtable out into the world. When not speaking, members are focused on paying full attention to what is being said and understanding what is trying to be communicated. So you don't have to agree with the speaker, but you have to actually listen to him rather than being busy about thinking what I'm going to say, how the speaker is wrong, how the speaker is wise or unwise, whatever it is. I'm just focusing on actually listening to what he has to say and hearing his point of view. It's a very difficult skill if never practiced before, but highly recommended. It can improve your quality of life and relationships. To connect to that, the next rule is we always add to the common pool of knowledge. We never negate, we never argue. So you can reference what some of the other speakers said if you want to strengthen it or if you agree with it. But if you don't agree with it, just don't reference that, just share your point of view. So if one of the speakers says, I believe that the sky is pink, and you know in your heart of hearts, and you have the proof to prove it that the sky is actually green, then instead of saying the speaker is wrong, the speaker is dumb, the speaker is whatever, just say, I believe that this sky is green. Everybody will have a turn. It goes in a circle, the order of speech. And the last rule is when we speak according to the question that was asked, and we take into consideration the beloved audience's attention span. And that's about it. So I want to do a quick intro of our participants today. We have some great people today. We have Dr. Shawn Baker, who's in his 50s. He's an orthopedic surgeon and a loving father. He operated in a couple of battle zones in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, in Afghanistan. And he's also a very serious athlete. He lifts much more than I can lift. He's in great shape. He has a lot of records of different sorts in athletic world, which is especially impressive considering his age. And he's a proponent of a carnivore diet, which is basically an all-meat diet. And apparently feels that this helps people heal sometimes even better than surgery. I think he got into some trouble by actually saying that because apparently eating meat does not make as much money for hospitals as much as surgery does. And he's all around a great guy, and I'm really excited to have him aboard. We have Nick Fott, who is a representative of the Roundtable. He's an accountant, a loving father, and he's representing our everyman. He's not an MD of any sort, but he's a roundtable regular, and he's going to help facilitate this atmosphere of listening and creating common understanding and sharing, etc. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Alan Goldhamer, which, can I share your age, Alan? Is that okay? Believe it or not, this young man is 60 years old. 60 years old. He's known as the Ancient One to his various grandchildren. He is in top health, and he's doctor of osteopathy. He's also a chiropractor, and for over 30 years, 34 years, I believe, he's been managing the TrueNorth Health Center, which helps people get much healthier. He is a proponent of a fully plant-based diet with the removal of S.O.S, sugars, oils, and salts. He'll be speaking about it in length, and he's also a proponent of water fasting, which means that you eat only water for a period of time, and apparently that has amazing results for your health. We have the evidence in front of us. Judge it as you may. So without any further ado, we are going to start the roundtable. So the first question that I want to ask you people is, how did you become interested in nutrition, and why do you feel that nutrition is important? Dr. Shawn Baker, take it away.
Well, I first became interested in nutrition for two reasons. One, my own personal health, and two, just with athletic performance. I transitioned through a whole bunch of different diets. I was on a kind of what would be considered a dietary guidelines, relatively normal diet, probably what would follow pretty closely with, lots of grains and vegetables and meats and dairy and not too much junk food, but I ate that pretty well. But despite, training and exercising very intensely my whole life, after I got to about 45 or 44, I think, I was developing health problems. And so I went to look for my own personal solution. So I transitioned. I went on a low fat, high fiber, heavy vegetable, low, lean meat type of diet. And I lost weight. I got leaner. I just didn't feel very good. I just didn't feel I could sustain that. And so I switched over, went into a more paleo-ish diet, and finally a kind of a low carb ketogenic diet for a couple of years. And then finally, about almost 20 months ago, I switched over to a fully carnivorous diet, and, just found the best results, both athletically and health wise, with those things. And then I, started applying those on some of the patients I was seeing, and saw that as they, reduced probably some of the same things that Dr. Goldhamer saw, reducing sugar, reducing oils, and some of those things that their health got better. And some of the reasons I was seeing them for, particularly joint related problems, were starting to go away. And so we ended up being able to, take patients that needed surgeries to no longer needing surgery. And so that's what kind of stimulated me to really pursue diet. And I've been kind of passionate about it for the last several years.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shawn. Dr. Nick, how did you become interested in nutrition? Sorry, not a doctor, Nick. And why do you feel that nutrition is important?
So my story is pretty typical. I grew up as a very active child. I played high school sports, really big into working out, lifting weights, and nutrition is a big part of that. As you get into more competitive sports, you start to recognize just how important it is to take care of your body with a proper diet. So that's something that I've really put a lot of focus on throughout the last decade or so of my life.
Thank you, Nick. Mm-hmm. Dr. Allen.
Well, actually, I got started when I was just a young kid, because my best friend, Doug Lyle, who happens to be the clinical psychologist at the TrueNorth Health Center, used to beat me in basketball. And it really bothered me. And I tried and I practiced and I still couldn't beat him. So I decided I would try to get an edge. I did some reading. I came across some works by Herbert Shelton and others and thought, well, I'll give that a try to see if it'll give me an edge to be able to beat him. Of course, it completely failed. He still beats me today every time we play. But it did get me interested. And it got me to thinking about the fact that, there's actually a cause of health, just like there's a cause of disease. And so that's really what started it for me, was trying to be a better basketball player. But I'm hoping now he might age out at a slightly faster pace, despite the fact he also eats a good diet. And maybe when we reach that 8th decade, I'll finally be able to beat him. But up till now, no luck.
So let's hope for the best. Let's hope there will be a rematch in your 80s, at which point you will absolutely crush each other friend. So the next question I want to ask you guys is, what are the risks? What's really the price that you pay for having a bad diet?
Well, I mean, I think, the risks are, legion. I mean, I think most of the chronic disease that we see today is certainly related to poor diet. Whether it eventually occurs or not, you're probably more likely to have it at a younger age. So your quality of life just suffers. And so we'll see people, as everybody can see, we have a huge obesity epidemic. We have a diabetes epidemic. We have people getting sicker and sicker at younger and younger ages. So I think it's just, it's so obvious and so dramatic that the fact that we aren't putting, tremendous amounts of resources into fixing diets, rather than what I call putting on expensive band-aids. Even some of the surgeries I did were just essentially band-aids. It wasn't like I was curing people of arthritis. I mean, yeah, you cut their knee out and stick a piece of metal in there. They don't hurt as much, but they still have the same disease problem that led them there. And a year later, their other knee's gonna wear out. And I'm sure Dr. Goldhamer has seen the same thing. And it's just, disease, whether it's physical disease and even mental health. I think mental health is hugely affected by diet. And I think, we have a lot of people that are just, walking around, almost zombie-like because they have such a poor physiology, due to their diet.
Nick, what are the risks one pays?
Yeah, I mean, I got to agree with Shawn on this. I mean, I think that we're seeing the risks play out right now. I mean, our country has a huge obesity epidemic, heart attacks, heart disease left and right. The food that we can buy, when we go to fast food is not really food. It hurts more than it helps. I think we can all, even just your average regular, person, I think we all have experienced what the risks are of eating unhealthy. I think we've all experienced what it feels like when you go on a binge of eating fast food for a couple days straight. So I think that we all can see the risks pretty easily.
Dr. Allen.
Well, 71% of people living in industrialized countries are overweight or obese. And so whatever diet we put together, and there's different ways you can do this, you have to figure out a strategy that's going to work to help resolve the obesity, because obesity is associated with dietary excess. So your cardiovascular disease, your diabetes type 2, your autoimmune disease, and many forms of cancer are intimately associated with us becoming fatter and sicker. So if we don't solve that issue, we don't solve the chronic degenerative disease issue. If we do solve it, and it doesn't, and I'm not arguing there's only one way to solve that, but that does have to be solved. If we recognize the reason why it's not being solved is largely based on the artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain of people that leads them to systematic overeating, that literally people essentially are addicts in the sense that they're stimulating that same neural cascade that drug addicts do, although it may not be quite as powerful. It will result in predictable behavior, and you see that in the United States. It's more than coincidental that in 1986, there wasn't a single state in the United States that had achieved over 14% obesity saturation. About the same time we introduced things like high fructose corn syrup, and we start federally subsidizing making these kinds of things very readily available, people now are consuming close to 150 pounds of sugar a year in various forms, not the least of which is high fructose corn syrup. And we're seeing this progressive geometric increase in obesity, including even more so in our kids. So clearly, the choices we're making of using highly refined carbohydrates in the diet, as well as processed foods, including oils, are resulting in some pretty undesirable results that have to be changed if health is the goal.
Great stuff. Apparently, corn syrup is not very good for you people. Stop eating it. So that brings me to the next question. What do you guys feel is the worst aspect? What's the biggest, baddest player in the modern American diet?
Well, I think you could call a donut the perfect example of what's wrong with the American diet. If you look what it is, it's processed, refined, highly energy dense carbohydrate, grain with some sort of industrialized, oil mixed with, sugar. And I think that there alone is a perfect, target for what we should be getting out of the diet. I think that more than anything is, I think that's my perfect food for what we shouldn't be eating.
The perfect food of what not to do, the donut. Nick.
Yeah, I mean, again, I got to agree with the two doctors. I think sugar and processing sugar with high fructose corn syrup is a huge problem. I myself, you were talking about that addict kind of mentality. I definitely have an addiction to sugar. So I hear you on that one.
Yeah.
Take it away, Dr. Allen.
So we have food, and there's various forms of natural foods, whether it be animal products or be, whole plant foods. But what we do is we take those foods and we add chemicals to them. And those chemicals include salt, oil, and sugar. These are highly refined fractionated chemicals. They're not even foods. They're food byproducts, fractionated food byproducts. And if you take animals, for example, if you put rats in a cage and give them ad libitum feeding to normal rats, they get to a certain size. And then satiety mechanisms kick in and they're stable. But if you add sugar, oil, and salt to those foods, they'll increase their weight 49% in 60 days. They'll get obese and develop the same disease as humans do. So I believe that's the addition of chemicals to food, whatever that food is that you're feeding people, that artificially stimulates the dopamine cascade in the brain that leads to systematic overeating and results in obesity and the disease of dietary excess.
Okay, so that leads us to the flip side of the question. What do you believe to be an ideal human diet? What are its benefits to humans living on it?
Okay, so ideal human diet. I think obviously I'm promoting a carnivorous diet. That's a diet I pursue, a diet that includes nutrition. In my view, animal nutrition is very nutrient dense. I think there's plenty of protein. I think we need enough fat in the diet to satisfy the essential nutrients that we need, the essential amino acids, essential fats. It has to include minerals and vitamins that we find essential. It has to be free of anything invented after 1900, you might as well just get rid of out of the diet. And then, things that are found typically fruits and nuts and, some vegetables and stuff like that. Those things are probably fine for most people. I think there's some personal tolerance, or some people do. So that what I think is pretty reasonable.
Nick.
Yeah, so kind of as I mentioned before, nutrition's been a pretty big deal to me for the majority of my life, and I've tried a lot of different diets. I've tried some fasting type diets. I did something called a lemonade cleanse. I've done that a couple times, lost some serious weight doing it, but it's not very sustainable, and I really doubt it's very healthy for you. I've also done things like the paleo diet. I've done a keto diet. I've done low carb diets, low fat. I've tried a lot of different diets out around. And what I feel works the best for me is a diet centered around maybe 1 day a week fasting, portion control, not eating late at night, and making sure that I cut, the artificial stuff like we've been talking about, as well as the sugar. And I try to keep my carbs pretty low as well. And I find that works for me. I find that I feel the best when I do that, when I have a nice balanced diet.
Dr. Allen.
So we advocate a diet of whole foods. So fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. If you put that diet together, you end up finding about 10 to 12% of calories coming from protein, about 15 to 18% of calories coming from fat, with the balance coming from complex carbohydrates. This is a diet that's rich in minerals, appropriate in protein, including the amino acid breakdown mix. If you break it down amino acid by amino acid, it's sufficient in calories. And one of the advantages to a plant-dominated diet, similar to the advantage to the higher protein diets, is that they provide satiety. In other words, you don't have your blood sugar levels and insulin levels bouncing all over the place, leading to systematic overeating on either type of diets that we're kind of discussing here. They both have advantages to provide biological feedback mechanisms so that it avoids overeating and the obesity that comes from the sugar and fat dominated diets that cause people to systematically overeat. I believe a whole plant food diet has also the advantage. It has lots of fiber, which is important to maintaining normal gut microbiome balance. And it also is consistent with the scientific literature in terms of the prevention and reversal of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and the types of cancers like lymphoma that we commonly work with, both in terms of reversing it and also sustaining health over many years. We've been doing this now 34 years. I've got my first 30-year follow-ups on patients. So we're able to see what happens when people apply these diets, not only in a contained environment where we have them at the TrueNorth Health Center, but over the long run. And it's really quite gratifying.
That sounds great. It really sounds like you guys are helping out people. That's good stuff. That's probably the point of it. That brings me to the next question. Do you believe that this diet is the best diet? Do you believe that it fits everybody, that it works for everyone? Do you think that it might not be ideal for different people depending on either their life condition, their financial situation, different biological differences, whatever the case may be? Or do you feel that this fits 100% of everybody?
Well, I don't think there's a single diet that'll work for 100% of the people on Earth. And I think from a biologic standpoint, I think humans are well equipped and evolved to digest and do very well on a meat-based diet, and even an all-meat diet. I think most humans share that capacity. There are some people that have, a few rare genetic disorders where they can't handle certain proteins. There are people that through life, and as they've gotten sicker and older, they may lose some capacity, particularly digestive capacity, to properly digest meat, and I think that's a state of pathology. There are certain people in parts of the world where it's just very difficult and financially unrealistic for them to go on an all meat based diet. And I think those are the biggest sort of things that would make this very hard for people. And then certainly, from a preference standpoint, not everybody is willing to give up other types of food, and that's just a choice they make, and if that's the right choice for them, that's the right choice for them. But I think certainly from a strict biological, physiologic standpoint, I'd say the vast majority of humans could do very well on this type of diet.
All right, so kind of speaking from a consumer standpoint, I think that there's a divide in our country with your typical person, in that I feel we all kind of feel a little lost. We all want just this one simple answer to what is the diet that will help us be healthy, help us be attentive, help us lose weight. Everybody just wants that magic answer. And I think that from what I'm taking from this conversation so far is that there is no one right way that works for every single person, but there are certain things that we've discussed that can be done. I don't know if what I do works the best for everyone. I know it works really well for me. I encourage anybody that's looking to be healthier to try some of those things. But again, I'm not a doctor, and I would definitely listen to these guys before you'd listen to me.
So we have kind of a unique situation because we live with our patients for anywhere from 3 weeks to a year. So we have a chance to see exactly what happens when they apply these dietary principles. And particularly, it's true in patients that we treat. We treat a lot of people with hypertension and diabetes and autoimmune disease. We know what to expect. We know the timelines it takes to resolve the condition. And we know that if they sustain the diet, they can sustain the results, both in terms of weight control and disease control. So we know that this is a way that works. It doesn't mean it's the only way, that could work. It doesn't mean there's not other patterns that might also work well, but we can actually demonstrate, document, and prove that this is one of the ways that is effective at helping reverse these diseases of dietary excess. And there's a good rational and logical reason why it would work, because I think that if you look both anthropologically through history and also in terms of our current situation, for example, you got 1.5 billion people on the planet that make less than $5 a day equivalent. What do they eat? Not by choice, but by force. They eat rice and beans because rice and beans are the lowest cost calories on the planet. Rice, beans, and local vegetables, and whenever possible, they'll get access to more concentrated calories like meat or other materials as well. But from an affordable economic standpoint, you can't argue that a plant-based diet isn't an affordable diet. It's the diet that a lot of people on the planet are eating by force. And it's only as countries become wealthier that they are more apt to adopt our more animal-rich diets and higher cost per calorie type of fare. And even the cost of calories for animal food is higher than it actually is because there's a lot of subsidies that go into keeping things the way they are, both in terms of water subsidies as well as direct subsidies to the industry. So I don't think we could argue that animal foods are the most cost-effective per calorie. I think we could argue that rice, beans, and vegetables are highly effective and efficient when it comes to, what it costs to get 2,000 calories of it.
Okay, and you feel, just to remind about the question, you feel that this would work for everyone, this diet?
Well, I think that it worked. There are definitely outliers. It's a biological. There's a bell curve, but I see 1,000 admissions a year in an inpatient setting, and 1,000 admissions a year are fed some version of a whole plant food S.O.S. free diet. In other words, we don't find anybody that we have to add sugar or oil or stuff to the diet. In this particular clinic, we also don't use animal products. There have been 3 patients, though, over the years that had hypoparathyroidism that we did need to add some sodium to the diet because they don't produce mineralocorticoids and absorb salt. So, clearly, even within our limited constraints, there are exceptions to the rule. But generally, no, whole plant food diets of some version or another can be adapted to help people meet their biological needs and overcome their disease. If you look at our data on hypertension, for example, we took 174 consecutive patients in a study we did with T. Colin Campbell from Cornell University. 174 people achieved pressure low enough to eliminate all use of medication. And the people that are able to sustain those diets are able to sustain those outcomes. So when it comes to high blood pressure, I've never had a patient where we've had to, we have to use fried chicken in order to get the result, or whatever, or sugar or, ice cream or something. There's other issues, though, besides what works biologically. There's also issues like was mentioned economically. There's also social issues. And then there's also another issue that hasn't been addressed, which is, for example, health versus athletic performance, for example. What you do to maximize athletic performance isn't necessarily the same thing you do to maximize health. So we've got to also be careful if you're dealing with maybe the same people but have different applications. You have a person that needs to burn 3,500 calories a day. Your diet's going to look a little bit different than it would a person that's living on 1,600 calories a day. Just by volume, you can only eat so much high nutrition, low caloric density foods. There's only so many hours in the day. You wouldn't live on salad, for example, with 100 calories a pound and expect to get 3,500 calories a day in there. You might have to go to more concentrated foods or process those foods more. For example, there's a big difference between eating even something like vegetables and blending those vegetables into soup in terms of the amount of energy that it takes to digest and absorb those foods. So you can process those foods in a way that may give you an advantage or a disadvantage. If your goal is losing weight, whole foods, minimally processed. If your goal is gaining weight, then you might want to take those foods a little bit further. You might want to do, say, rice pasta rather than just brown rice, just because you can get 1,500 calories a pound versus 500 calories a pound.
So this is actually a great segue for our next question. So our next question is, what are some common risks or pitfalls that people should be aware of if they try to adopt this diet that you propose? If there's anything that they should be aware of risk-wise, anything that you should be aware of that people have trouble assimilating this diet or making it work for them, depending on what they do or whatever.
Well, transitioning to any diet that is a remote departure from, or significant departure from what you're usually used to, there is a transition period. A lot of people will, have a fairly rough transition. Some people will find, particularly because meat is very satisfying and satiating, that they will undereat, and so they'll struggle with energy issues. Some people will find that they go through a quote-unquote keto flu type adaptation period where there'll be significant shifts in fluid and electrolytes, and so they may develop things like headaches. Their sleep may be disrupted. Some of the GI issues that occur as you adopt a fully meat-based diet. Your output from an elimination standpoint dramatically goes down because the meat is just extremely well absorbed in the small intestine. So a lot of people notice a definite decrease in the amount and volume of elimination when they go to the bathroom. And so that's something people have to be aware of. Some people will note transient flare-ups of joint pain. Often that has to do with people that initially go into ketosis, because many people do when they do this diet. And sometimes when we're not very good at utilizing ketones yet, we waste a lot of them out through the kidneys, and that could compete with uric acid excretion, so that can cause a flare-up of joint pain. So people that have either a predisposition or a history of gout may notice a temporary increase in those symptoms, although long-term, those things tend to go away. There are certainly pitfalls when it comes to social aspects. It's most restaurants you go to will have a meat-based option. It's not that hard to get a steak or a burger patty or something like that, or a piece of fish or a piece of chicken from a restaurant. That's pretty typical. The problem is they always want to put it with this or that, potato or bread or pasta or some kind of vegetable, and so that may be socially awkward for some people. Some people will struggle with a relative lack of variety, or the fact that they're comfortable eating a certain way and this is outside their comfort zone. Again, these all tend to be traits most people will find. One of the more interesting things people see is a dramatic reduction in cravings for these other foods, which is kind of unique to the diet, because I think their nutritional needs are being met so well that they sometimes no longer require a lot of things that normally would have been trigger foods for them, where they kind of end up face down in a bag of donuts or in a chocolate cake. So those are those are some of the things that really no, those are the most common things. There's a few other things out there, but those are the most common.
For the way that I eat, the things that I struggle with the most would probably be hunger, because I don't eat past, say, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. at night. I get hungry if I don't go to bed early. I also notice it takes a lot of self-control, and it also takes planning. You have to plan your meals out, and that's difficult nowadays with people. Everyone's just running around like chickens with their heads cut off. So, it takes planning. You got to cook at home. You got to go grocery shopping, So if you can commit to those types of things, I think that you'll be fine. I guess a pitfall I see here, though, is that I don't think people really understand what is necessarily a healthy diet. I think that there is a discussion right now in society that says, plant-based diet, meat-based diet, which one is the one? When I feel like, as we've come through this discussion, it could be either or, and it may be more affected by other variables and less whether you're eating meat or veggies. I don't know. I could be wrong, but maybe the doctors could elaborate more.
Well, I think, there's a lot of pitfalls, as has already been mentioned, of varying anything from the norm. If you're not able to drive into the drive-in and you're not able to get the frozen delivered pizzas or whatever it is, the convenience factor is a factor. And as was just mentioned, there's shopping, there's chopping, there's effort that takes to eat this type of health promoting diet. Other challenges, as also have been mentioned, is anytime you make a dietary change, there's an adaptation that occurs. Adapting to a low salt diet takes about a month for people. If you take the salt out of the food, at first the food is tasteless to people, and then after about 4 weeks on average, less if they do fasting, actually get taste and adaptation. We're actually doing a clinical trial right now at the TrueNorth Health Center where we're measuring quantitatively perceptions of salt and sugar before and after these changes. And so we're actually showing that there's actually perceptive changes that occur. So when you get on a lower salt diet or you get rid of the sugar, one of the things that most people notice when they get rid of the sugar is they stop getting the insulin vacillations that are associated with hunger cravings. So for example, people that stop eating sugar, but they stop eating at 6 o'clock at night because they're using intermittent fasting and trying to get a 12 or 14-hour fasting window, don't experience the degree of hunger that they would have before. So even though they might be eating whatever their diet is, if they're still getting a lot of refined sugars in there, they'll still have more of those craving issues than they will later. Fat, it takes people about 3 months on average to get normal satiety from a lower fat diet. So now the diet that I'm advocating isn't actually low fat. It's about 15 to 18% of calories from fat. It's still got plenty of essential fatty acids in it, but it's still different than a much higher fat diet, maybe that would be more traditional, to 40% of the calories or more from fat. And so at first people won't feel full and satiated because they're triggering off the higher fat intake, but eventually they do adapt, and then they feel they can eat, a lower fat diet and still reach satiety. The other side effect is they are going to lose weight. And when they lose weight and they're not as fat as their friends, a lot of their friends, particularly if they're females, are going to get treated very badly. Women that go to work and have lost 50 pounds, the other women don't greet them and say, Oh, we're so proud of you. What, have you gone on a healthy diet? No, you walk in the room and it's, oh, here she comes, that, and they know why they've lost weight, because they think that she's a mate poaching whore, and so they'll bring them cupcakes and sugary treats trying to undermine their success. I've actually had women patients tell me they've had to wear baggy clothes to work so as just not to activate the anger of some of their fellow workers. Men, it's not quite as big of a problem, because the man loses 50 pounds and goes to work. The other men, well, they don't notice. And if they do, they don't care. So it's not quite kind of as tough on the men as the women losing weight. But you'd think losing weight was always a good thing if you're overweight. But actually, it creates a lot of psychological dynamics that sometimes is quite challenging for people. So I think there's lots of challenges. But overall, the net benefit is so highly positive. People that recover their health don't complain too much about the fact they had to put extra effort into it, particularly if you're working with people that are appropriately motivated. And people that are appropriately motivated are driven by pain, debility, and fear of death. So pain or debility or fear of death, or all three if possible. That's why I think we all probably find autoimmune patients are pretty good patients, because they'll do just about anything. They'll adopt any kind of diet so long as they can get out of pain.
That's awesome.
That's an interesting side effect of adopting a health promoting diet that I wouldn't have considered. You might get some barbs from so next question is, can you provide some examples? What are some great examples or your own personal story of how this diet that you've adopted, that you consult people to take, of how it really helped people, some kind of a story of an amazing result, or results that you've had with certain people, something that people could relate to?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly my story is not tremendously dramatic. I had a few minor health issues that got better. My athletic performance got significantly better when I switched over to diet. But more importantly, I've literally been collecting, now hundreds of different life-altering anecdotes and stories from people, and I put that on a website called meatheals.com, and we categorize that by different malady, whether it's arthritis or depression or autoimmune diseases or digestive diseases or skin diseases or weight loss or blood pressure or cardiac issues. We've got all these tremendous examples of people really revolutionizing their health, just putting these what were otherwise chronic, unremitting, uncurable diseases into remission, and which I think is very, very rewarding. Things like rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis and just plain run-of-the-mill diabetes. I mean, those things are going away. So I think that's a very, very inspiring. And I've always made this sort of statement that I think a powerful story is very moving for people, and it inspires people, and collecting those and showing those up where people can relate to those things. So I think they're very important. And, and again, people will argue that that's not true science. And certainly there's something to be said for that. But, most scientific studies start out with anecdotes, and they start out with, observations. And these are observations, and they're coming by the, not ones and twos, but the hundreds now. And so I think it's something we have to pay attention to.
Yeah. So generally when I talk to people about portion control, that's kind of the biggest thing that I hear from people around me. But speaking from my personal experience, I dropped about 30 pounds in about, a 4-month period, 5-month period, changing my diet up. I went from being a very stereotypical, early 30s, late 20s type person, eating fast food all the time, and, basically just doing what was most convenient. I ended up going through a big bout of depression. I would never had energy. My happiness just annihilated. Your diet, it just affects so much of your life. And ever since I made that change, I dropped my weight. My happiness is returned. My demeanor just is loads better. I sleep better at night. I have energy when I work out, much more than when I'm eating fast food or when I'm, eating something that's not good for me. So, from my personal experience, a combination of a lot of different types of things has been beneficial for me.
Dr. Allen, some striking examples of results of your diet.
Well, I mentioned earlier a study with 174 consecutive patients with hypertension demonstrating the largest effect size that's ever been shown in treating hypertension in humans, with an average effect of 60 points in stage 3 hypertension. So clearly, high blood pressure, this is a model that works well. We have recently published a paper in the British Medical Journal, which was an individual case report of a young woman with follicular lymphoma stage 3 that had been well documented and tracked for 2 years, comes in and fasts for 21 days, resolves her tumors, and now we've just submitted the follow-up, 3-year follow-up. She's completely cancer-free. We've got well documented CTs of her over the last 3 years, and she's stuck to a whole plant food SOS-free diet and is just thriving. So again, we all have lots of examples, and I would say one of the things you want to look at is what's the common factor here? Whether you're on an all-meat diet or an all-plant diet, these diets all are helping eliminate dietary excess in terms of consistent overeating and obesity. If you get rid of the diseases of dietary excess, you're going to see clinical improvement. The question is, what is the long-term sustainable diet? In other words, what works short-term? That's important. But also what works long-term? What does the evidence suggest that people can sustain indefinitely and minimize premature aging, et cetera? That's would be interesting to see what studies will ultimately yield. I think all these diets that get rid of excess, though, are going to certainly demonstrate some benefit.
100%. It's very exciting to find a lot of commonalities here. We're towards the end of our roundtable. One question I feel that's important to address is, do you recommend that children adopt this diet that you espouse as well? If so, from what ages and to what extent?
Yeah, I mean, circle accounts of, generations going back for thousands of years of children living, thriving, free of any nutritional deficiencies and in apparent very good health that have adopted or lived on, a either fully carnivorous or almost fully carnivorous diet. And so I don't think there's a problem with children doing it. I think breastfeeding is obviously a good starting point. You breastfeed them until they're done with that, and then you can transition them to a diet that is heavy in animal-based products, particularly meat. And then, include other things as necessary, as needed, as desired by the children. I think letting them fill up first on the most nutritious food available, the most concentrated nutrition, to me makes the most sense from a developmental standpoint, from a satiety standpoint, and from a metabolic standpoint. And so I think kids are just like anyone else. They need to be eating healthy foods, and they need to be eating whole foods, and they need to not, eat the processed garbagey type food that's so ubiquitous and and that we are, sort of being compelled to eat.
So just for reference, I have a 4 and 6 year old, and generally kids that young, they're difficult to get to eat. It can be trying sometimes, but I generally just feed them what I eat. I do the same stuff with them. We sit down, we eat dinner together. I make sure that they eat, kind of earlier on in the evening. So I guess I'm kind of, backhandedly training them to eat the way I eat. They seem to enjoy it. I would recommend it for my kids, but I don't have any medical knowledge to back that up.
Dr. Allen.
Yeah, well, I would definitely, I would first of all, I would argue that I believe that the perfect food for children, infants anyway, is breast milk. Mm-hmm. So I'm suggesting that they actually go on an exclusively animal-based diet, certainly the first 6 months, and dominantly through up to the first 2 years. And that then we transition to a whole plant food SOS-free diet, which is what we do with our children, our grandchildren, our kids, and our patients. And that works very well for kids. But it is interesting that one of the most important things I think we can do for our children is to breastfeed them. And I'd like to see mom eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet while she's doing so. But in any case, whether she is or she isn't, breastfeeding I think is one of the most important things we do for kids.
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement. Yeah, I think that's essential, particularly when you look at what's in the formula these days, where it's corn oil and corn syrup.
Yeah, all the stuff we both disagree with.
Interesting segue. So the most health promoting diet, apparently, if you're under the age of 2, is breast milk. That's the consensus. It seems to be around our roundtable. So one of our last final questions, is there anything else that you want to share with our viewers, any insight about the diet that you promote or health in general, or something that you feel that is important to pass on to our viewers? Dr. Shawn.
Again, like Goldhamer says, there are several ways to skin a cat, and we definitely have a good example of what doesn't work. What most people, what we're told to eat just doesn't. Assuming you're interested in your health, still be interested in it until they get some awful disease and they're so miserable that they take up a diet. But I would suggest you do that earlier in life. You be conscious about that. I wish I'd have done that 20 years ago. That's again, maybe it doesn't work out for you. Carnivorous diet, maybe something else you try. Carnivorous diet, it doesn't work out for you, then you can certainly try the other option. It certainly works for you. Be objective about it. Really count what really assess objectively what actually makes a difference. And I think we feel good running around depressed all the time. There's something wrong. We're not supposed to be that way. You should experience life where you have energy, you're not depressed, you physically work well, cylinders, and if you need to investigate what's causing it.
Nick, any last words you want to share with our viewers?
Yeah, actually, I thought of a question, if that's okay. I want to ask the doctors. So my mom recently was diagnosed with dementia, and I was wondering if either of you have any kind of data or opinions on the neurological effects of each of your dietary plans.
All right, so
like I guess the long-term effect. Is there a long-term effect that could possibly help, say, Alzheimer's, dementia, any kind of reversible effects you've seen in your data?
A very personal question from Nick. Alan, why don't you talk about if there's anything in general that you want to share about diet or health in general? And you can talk about water fasting as well. You haven't mentioned it much. And then we'll do another round about dementia specifically to address.
So I believe strongly that health is the result of healthful living, and that healthful living involves diet and exercise and sleep. And so, we can debate about the specifics of what's the best exercise program or what's the best, dietary program. But ultimately, those are the behaviors that are going to make the difference. And ultimately, the judge is how well does it work for you, as was just mentioned. If it works for you and you can and feel confident and comfortable that this is promoting health, and that's going to be a good thing. My experience has been that a whole plant food diet that's free of sugar, oil, salt is a diet that consistently generates the results, at least in the patient population that we treat, in reversing diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune diseases, and certain forms of cancer. As far as dementia is concerned, this is a condition, I think, that the real cure for Alzheimer's is prevention. Mm-hmm. And I actually think we're ultimately going to find a lot of that actually starts back in the gut. Now, there's people at the Buck Institute that we work with here in Novato that are doing some research, and they have found actually that dietary manipulation, and they happen to be using a plant-based diet, does seem to slow the rate of progression in this condition and maybe even demonstrate some clinical improvement. But there isn't any magic bullet out there in terms of reversing Alzheimer's that's already formed, in my experience. I haven't seen that, including with a very aggressive form of detoxification that we use, which is medically supervised water-only fasting, where we fast patients on water only up to 40 days. And it works fabulously well at diseases associated with dietary excess, like high blood pressure. We will fast a patient until their blood pressure is normal, and then we'll feed them a whole plant food S.O.S-free diet, which they will then be able to sustain the results. But that's a radical kind of intervention that's done in a medically supervised setting. It's not something that you tell people, well, go to work and don't eat for 30 days and expect that you're going to have a good outcome. That's not how we recommend that. Now, there are people like Walter Longo doing intermittent fasting, where they just ask people, whatever their diet is, don't eat after a certain time at night, say 6 or 7, don't eat before a certain time in the morning. So they get 12 or 14 hours of fasting every night. And even that small amount of incremental fasting is thought to induce biochemical changes associated with reversal of aging and prevention of disease and et cetera. Or they'll limit calories 1 or 2 days a week to 6 or 100 calories or something, just to try to facilitate, weight loss. So there's lots of different versions of manipulating the diet so we get rid of dietary excess, including the alternative diet that we've been suggested, which is to eat a diet exclusively of animal foods, which also wouldn't have sugar and wouldn't bounce your blood sugar levels, would put you into ketosis, much like fasting does. It's actually referred to often as a fasting mimicking diet. So, all of these mechanisms that facilitate elimination of weight loss, I have no surprise, would demonstrate some clinical benefit.
Awesome.
Dr. Shawn, do you want to address the question about dementia?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple good points that Dr. Goldhamer made, and I'm glad he made them. I think, dementia, much of dementia is probably a sort of a later stage metabolic that people will call it type 3 diabetes. And I think there's some underlying pathophysiology that's leading people are going to see years is a huge epidemic of dementia that's just going to lag behind this diabetes epidemic that we're currently in. There's a Dr. Dale Breslin, I think, who has a ketogenic type approach towards improving Alzheimer's disease. I know he's had some success with that. And so, again, some of the same things that Dr. Goldhamer talked about with fasting and inducing ketogenesis may have a role in that. I think that, when he mentioned, cancer patients, and I'm glad he did that, because a lot of people, we kind of have this, for some reason, almost a religious reverence to cancer, that we're not allowed to talk about cancer, and we're not allowed to say that nutrition can impact that. And I think that is misguided. Cancer is a disease. It's a chronic disease, just like any other disease out there, whether it's arthritis or diabetes or heart disease. And we should aggressively look for nutritional intervention, but certainly, mitigate it, or, even we know that most cancers, 70, maybe even 90% are environmentally induced. And we have to look at things that more people are talking about in the context of nutrition, as a way forward. I think it's important to do that.
Nick, feel good?
Yeah, I feel good. Thank you so much for answering that question.
Rock and roll. Dr. Allen, you already addressed that, I believe. So our last question really is, how can our viewers connect with you if they want to hear more about the diet you promote, if they want to go be treated in your health center, if they want to hear more about you? What is the best way to reach out to you, connect to you?
Yeah, probably the best way, what I'm most active on, tends to be my Instagram, which is Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER, 1967. I've got links in my bio for a number of websites that I participate in, like meatheals.com, Shawn-Baker.com, and some others. I've also got, a fairly significant presence on Twitter still. S. Baker MD is where I go there. So I generally most days I'm adding and discussing, and I generally am pretty good about answering messages. People direct message me, pretty regularly. I tend to get 30 or 40 a day at least. And, generally within a few days, I'll answer. If it's an easy, quick answer, I usually do it right then. If it's something that takes more time and effort, it may take me a couple of days to get back to people, but pretty good about answering those questions, at least for the time being. Hopefully, well, as I get busier and busier and more people, it may not be a realistic thing for me anymore. But for now, I'm still doing my best to answer everybody and talk to people, and people send me emails all the time. So that is, one way to get a hold of me.
Nick, people want to connect with the Roundtable. They want to suggest topics to discuss. They want to comment on your beautiful haircut. How can they reach out to you?
They can comment below. They can get on our Facebook. They can either search the Roundtable or follow one of the links on our YouTube channel. You want to talk to Tomer or I, go ahead, hit us up. Let us know.
Dr. Allen.
Well, we have a website. It's healthpromoting.com. And we have a book. It's called The Pleasure Trap.
Awesome stuff. So I'm going to post the links to everything in the description. And I want to thank all of our participants, both of our doctors and our beloved Nick, for a great discussion. I think it was a great example of how people with essentially, in a lot of ways, so to speak, in opposite position, are able to come and listen to each other respectfully and even agree with each other, see where they do agree. Because a lot of times when people are arguing, there isn't actually that much space of disagreement. There's the Pareto's law of there's 20% of what we disagree on, and we're going to argue over that. And I think it was a great example of two people who are very professional in their world. They really know what they're talking about, and they really believe in it, and have helped thousands of people over the years. and they're able to come and listen to each other and share and offer a lot of value to the audience. So it was a great roundtable as far as I'm concerned. I'm really, really grateful to all the participants. I hope the audience enjoys this as well. Feel free to comment, ask questions, propose future topics below. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Have a great, great evening.
All right. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Cool.